This episode is brought to you by Monogram. Welcome to the Design Dash podcast, your guide to designing a life you love. Join us as we explore the keys to living the life you want without compromise.
Welcome to the Design Dash podcast. I'm Laura Umansky here with Melissa Grove, and our guest today is Avery Thatcher, which I'm so excited to talk to her because I'm following her on socials and on her podcast, which is excellent. So I'm going to ask Avery, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, because if it was me introducing you, I'd be like, oh, she's a life coach, just because I do not have the vocabulary to describe what you do. So please, tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Yeah. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm just so excited. I am a super nerd and will be happy to talk about burnout all day, every day. So good. I'm super excited for this. So yes, I started off my career as a registered nurse working in ICUs across Canada. And I noticed really early on that the number one reasons why adults found themselves in the ICU were because of illnesses and diseases that could be linked to chronic stress. So I decided to get out of the reactive side of medicine back in 2015 and started building a business around stress management and teaching all of those things, the yoga, the mindfulness, the journaling, the reflective writing, all of the things. And then at the end of 2018, I had a very epic burnout experience that's left me with a chronic illness and a disability. And I was frustrated because I was doing everything right, but I still burnt out. So being the super nerd that I am, went back into the research, found the missing pieces of the puzzle. And that's really what we talk about today. Because when I work with people, I really see myself as a burnout recovery and prevention strategist, because everybody's life is different. Everybody's experiences are going to be different. And so we really have to approach it with more strategy, less just, hey, how are you feeling today?
Okay, there's so much to unpack here. So let's talk first about burnout, because I feel like I have been, and I'm not diagnosed as having burnout. I don't even know if that's a thing. Is that a thing? Maybe. But I'd love to know, how do you know is it just like you one day just can't move anymore? What does burnout look like?
So the answer to that is it depends, because there's actually 4 different kinds of burnout. And we can be in any combination of all of these. But really, when we're looking at burnout, it's more of an energy management issue than a stress management issue. And so the easiest way to explain this is to imagine that you're sitting in a boat and the boat is full of holes. But it's okay because you've got a bucket and a life jacket. And so then as that water is slowly pouring in, you're using that bucket to bail yourself out. But then eventually the water starts to pour in a little bit too fast. Your arms are getting tired and you can't really bail yourself out as much. And then eventually your life jacket catches you. And so in this scenario, burnout is your life jacket. Because burnout is our body's fail-safe mechanism to prevent failure, really. And then all those stress management strategies that I listed before, those are your bucket. But if we want to be able to do those to manage the stress that's pouring into our boat, we have to have the energy to do it. And so when we're looking at the different kinds of burnout, we're actually looking at 4 different kinds of energy. There's physical energy, which is what we typically equate our energy levels to. You can either get up off the couch and do your things, or you need to give yourself a pep talk to go pee. Yeah. Or then you have emotional energy, which is your ability to hold space for other people and have the patience and the, that space that you need to be able to manage some really difficult situations. Then we also have mental energy, which is our ability to make good decisions. And so when we come home at the end of the day, or when we finish our work day and someone asks us what for dinner and we're like, I don't know, pizza. That's when we're out of mental energy. And then the last is the fulfillment energy piece. And so this is the one that's a little bit different, because often when we think of burnout, we think of either the mental, physical, or emotional drain, when that battery is empty and we feel like we've got nothing to give. But fulfillment burnout is when your life can look absolutely beautiful on paper, but you're miserable. And so that's where we don't feel connected to a greater purpose, where we don't feel like we're making a difference in our corner of the world. And those energy batteries all really work well together. And you could be burnt out in one of those, all 4 of them, some combo. And it's learning about where we're burnt out is the first place to start.
We'd like to thank our good friends at Monogram Appliances. We've partnered with Monogram for over a decade with our design firm, Laura U Design Collective, and we're so happy to partner with them in producing the Design Dash podcast. Monogram sources the highest quality materials for their appliances, from commercial grade stainless steel to unscratchable sapphire glass, Monogram ensures lasting beauty and unmatchable quality for your luxury kitchen. And not only that, but they have an amazing team who we love working with, and we know you will too. So thanks, Monogram.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay. Some of that is resonating with me personally. So when burnout hits, what do you do? Like what in the world do you do? And how is it tied to motivation? Because like, I feel like and maybe motivation is the wrong word, but I feel like motivation is just completely at a standstill during burnout.
Yes, definitely. And so there's two things to talk about in that. So let's talk about the motivation piece first.
Okay.
So when we look at our stress response, this is really where burnout kind of is the end game of the chronic stress response. So when we're stressed, our body is meant to see the like danger running at us for us to go and then to run away to safety. That's what our body was designed for. But because chronic stressors like inflation, the economy, the world is on fire right now, and it's so distressing, everything that's going on. So all of those things are holes in our boat that are draining our energy. And so that contributes to more stress. And so when we're in this stressed out state, if you think that you're running away from something dangerous, contemplating the meaning of life, or solving a complex problem, or giving yourself motivation to do something new, it's not a thing. Your brain is not programming those kinds of responses. So this is why it's really hard for us to make those good decisions, for us to have the motivation. And also it's because of those energy batteries being low. Now, when we talk about what we can do when we're in burnout, we have to actually understand what burnout looks like. So a lot of people think that it's a cycle. Mm-hmm. So you start at the top and you're in this peak performance space, everything's beautiful and life is wonderful. And then everything kind of piles on and gets a little bit too heavy, and then you come down and crash into the bottom. And then you come back up the other side of that circle, back up to the top when you finally can slow down enough or like get enough to recoup your energy. But the truth is that burnout's actually like a wave. So like a ball bouncing down a hill, you're going to start up high and then you're going to crash into burnout. You're going to get a little bit better, but not nearly as high, and then you're going to crash again. And then you're going to come back up a little bit, crash again. And then eventually most of us seem to be living in this space where we're just oscillating between getting our head above water before life kicks us down and we're back in burnout again. So when we look at that, there's actually 3 stages to burnout recovery, and it's all tied to our energy. And first we have to recover energy, because like I mentioned before, if you're just totally burnt out, all of your energy batteries are drained, you know what you should do, but you have to want to do it first. So that's why we need to work on recovering some of that energy first.
Yeah, I've always heard that once you get burnt out, like it's really, really difficult, if not impossible, to get up and out of it. So I feel like so many people, once they do reach that burnt out stage, they're just like, okay, well, it makes you even like fall into more despair, because you're like, okay, well, you're not motivated, right? And
yeah, this ball bouncing down the hill sounds really distressing.
Yeah, and it can. And absolutely, when we feel like we're just there, just in that oscillating phase where we can't really seem to get our feet back underneath us, that's where learning how to dig yourself out is really important. Now, when I say dig yourself out, it sounds like you're using like big construction vehicles to lift all of the heavy things out of your life to be able to get yourself out. But really, it's a lot easier than you'd think. And you can start to see significant improvement in your burnout recovery within a couple weeks. But what we have to start looking at is some of the bigger picture. So once we've recovered your energy, then we have to start optimizing your habits. That's the next phase to get you out. Because when we're looking at how can I lower my mental fatigue, how can I make sure that I'm supporting the energy that I have in the best way possible? And this is something for me, as somebody that lives with multiple chronic illnesses and a disability, I really have to monitor the energy levels and know what works for me to recharge those batteries. So for example, I did 4 90-minute presentations in a single day at a conference, and it was a lot. It was like game day, like carb loading prior to the thing to be like, hey, I can do this. But at the lunch hour break, I could have gone and networked with other people. I could have visited and done the things, but instead I laid down in the room on my yoga mat, my feet up the wall in a dark room with earplugs in, because I knew that recharges my mental, physical, and emotional energy. and it recharges it the fastest way possible. So by learning those kinds of things of how we can manipulate our own energy batteries, make sure that they're not like the old iPhone batteries that never held a charge. We want to get back into those phases, and that's where we can start to optimize our energy. But finally, we do have to look at the patterns, behaviors, beliefs that are perpetuating burnout, like perfectionism, overcommitting, people pleasing, being a woman. All of these things can really contribute to burnout. And so we have to learn how to work with them, because they're not inherently good, bad, or indifferent. It's just they can either serve us or sabotage us.
So some of the things you're describing sound like depression. So how can you tell the difference? Or are they two sides of the same coin? Are they intertwined? How can you tell the difference between depression and burnout?
I get asked this question a lot. And so often, they're very much intertwined.
Okay.
Because really, depression is a drain in emotional energy.
Mm-hmm.
Because we just feel like there's nothing that brings those energy levels back up. And so depression and burnout often do go hand in hand, and they're often diagnosed together or misdiagnosed as one or the other. So really, we have to look at the bigger picture for those kinds of answers.
I appreciate that you were able to sit in a room and put your headphones in and just sit there on your yoga mat. Sometimes my anxiety won't let me. Like I'll be in a same scenario as you are, and then I'll like force myself to go network, and then I feel terrible afterwards, right? Because I did push myself to that burnout. So are there any tips for just recognizing that you're getting to a specific point and then setting those boundaries that you were able to set for yourself so like you can improve?
Yeah, so part of that is really, and every time I bring someone on my podcast to tell their burnout story, almost everyone says, like, what do you wish that you could tell yourself before? And it's listen to your body. Listen to your body. Because sure, there's the drive and that anxiety of like, oh, I should be doing this instead. But that's where we need to look at those beliefs. Because again, that's what perpetuates that burnout, keeps knocking us back down that hill. So when we eventually get to a point where you are ready to dig into some of those things, that's where we start to address, how can I bring that into a serving side of things? Because absolutely, the desire to push yourself a little and to get out there, that can serve you completely in so many ways. But we just have to recognize when we're starting to tip the scales into the sabotaging level.
Man, I think maybe, I don't know if this is a female thing, maybe it is, or maybe it's like an entrepreneur thing, or I don't know, but it's the guilt. It's like, I feel like I've got to push myself further. And if I don't, like you just said, Melissa, like I don't even know who the hell I'm letting down, somebody. And so you talk about digging into your belief system. And I've done work with a coach about that as well. I don't feel like I've gotten very far with it, honestly, but how do you begin to approach digging into someone's belief? Like, what is that, their belief system? What does that look like for you when you're working with someone?
Yeah, so I really follow the internal family systems model when I work with people.
I've never heard of this.
What this means, yes, I know. And it's so fun and a little bit weird, but it's got so much research behind it. And a lot of psychotherapy is centered around this process. And it's been incredibly helpful for me and my anxiety and my OCD and then all of the illnesses that keep coming my direction. So basically what you're trying to do is separate yourself, the true self, from the protectors that you have, from the learned behaviors that you have, from the sides of you that really need to be protected, those exiled bits that need to be hidden away because they've been hurt before. And so we need to start to create some separation from these. And so one of the easiest examples, and one that I do really early on in my program, is with our inner critic. Yeah. Because our self-talk can just get ramped up so quickly, especially when we're doing something new. And that's actually linked back to our stress response as well, because our body likes things to stay the same, even if the same isn't really good for us. And so when we try and do something different, our inner critic runs around our brain, presses all the panic buttons, and then says everything it could think of to make us go back to the way things were, to make us doubt ourselves, to make us, feel awful about what we're trying to do, or to make it seem impossible. And so what we want to do then is first, let that inner critic write to us. And so you just write down a note from that inner critic. I don't recommend you read it, but just let it out. And just like, it's ugly, it's messy, doesn't have to be legible, like just let it out. And then the next step is for you to write them back and to recognize the role that your inner critic has played in your safety. Because you're not going to tell them off, because this part of you still deserves compassion and love. But you're just going to
very similar to shadow work a little bit.
Yes. So shadow work is the newer age way of looking at this kind of thing.
Yeah. I don't know what I mean. Yes, you're just like, shut the hell up, inner critic. No, you're like, it's okay.
Yeah, and you can start there.
Okay, inner critic, you're okay.
Yeah, and that's really the thing, is because our protective parts, like our inner critic, are really coming in because they think that we're unsafe, because we're doing something different. And they want to keep us safe, because when we were a child, we needed that. We needed that part of us to step up. But we're a lot different now. We're grown-ass women. We've got things that we've learned, and there's things that we can do, and we can speak up for ourselves. And so we need to show these protective, reactive side of us that we can handle it. It may not be pretty, but we can handle it. And so it's starting to build that self-trust again. And that's the really important piece, is building this self-efficacy and the self-trust.
Melissa, I know you've got so many things. What's going on?
I mean, I'm just one of those people, I think, who's really susceptible to burnout. Like, I mean, I have terrible anxiety. During the pandemic, I started having panic attacks and not had to go to therapy. I'm a huge believer in therapy, not like I was forced. I think that it's important, and everybody should go if they can. And so that kind of leads me into another question, like before we even get to the burnout stage, because I'd like to avoid that. I'd like to avoid getting there as much as possible. Like, what are you doing day to day to prevent burnout from even happening? Like, what do you recommend people do?
Great question. Great question. So one of the things is, unfortunately, hindsight's a jerk. And so by looking back, we can see some of those red flags that maybe we couldn't see at the time. And I heard this said ages ago, and I can't remember who said it because it was on a video that I just scrolled on by. So if you know, listening to this right now, who said this first, please tell me. I really want to credit them. But really, sometimes we can't see our red flags because they're pointed at us. So it's only that skinny edge of the flag. And so this is where we're looking to have somebody help turn the wind, or for us to look back and be like, oh, there it was. So that way we can start to recognize some of those signs earlier. So when we're looking at how to prevent the next episode of burnout, look at some of the warning signs for you for what could bring on burnout from the past. So for me, it's when I see things from my to-do list going from the next day to the next day to the next day to the next day, I know that I'm overcommitting myself, so that I need to step back from that. But the most important thing that we can do is remember to look for pockets of time for self-care, not a solid 30 minutes. Because I really wish I could go back and meet the person that said that first, that you need 30 minutes a day of self-care, and I just want to shake them. Be like, why? Why did you set such a unrealistic expectation for so many people? Because, like, who has a solid 30 minutes where you can actually shut your brain down and have it go nice and quiet? That's not a thing anymore. Mm-hmm. So when we're looking for pockets of time, we're actually looking for 60 seconds before we leave the car to go into the building that we're in. 15 seconds of deep breathing before we go on a podcast interview like this. Having a cup of tea and actually taking 3 sips before you do anything else. Those little moments of time can actually be really beneficial for burnout recovery and prevention. And so when we look at things like our cortisol cycle, for example, when our cortisol, it's a natural hormone in our body. It's our normal wake me up in the morning hormone. But when we are constantly stressed, the cortisol levels are higher than normal. And so when we have our normal cycle, usually it wakes us up in the morning and then it starts to come down during the day so that our sleep hormones can kick in and all is good. But when we have too much stress, then our cortisol cycle stays really close to that wake me up threshold. So that it doesn't take very long for it to come back up and wake us up, say 3:30, 4 in the morning. And then it's struggling to keep us asleep after that. And so when we can do something like do 5 slow, deep breaths for 5 seconds on the inhale, 5 seconds on the exhale, 5 times a day, that can be incredibly impactful because it's going to constantly be turning off your stress switch and keep those cortisol levels low. And now I know 5 times a day sounds like a lot. So if you do your 5 breaths for 5 seconds on the inhale, 5 seconds on the exhale, when you get up, before each major meal, and before you go to bed, That's 5. And that's all you need. The science shows it's very effective.
It sounds like a lot of this is just about focus, maybe, or quieting your mind to some of these outside things and really focusing inward, would you say?
Yeah, it can be for sure. And then I feel like some people, especially with a neurodivergent brain, really struggle to quiet inside, right? And then depending on what kind of history we have, if you have a history of trauma, for example, trying to quiet inside can actually become harmful. So we need to make sure that you're working with someone that understands the traumatic nervous system and that that's an actually injured nervous system, just to make sure that you're working with the right methods to be able to find that inner stillness and the outer chaos around you. But a lot of it is learning how to be like riding a wave. So there's this Taoist saying that, the river goes down the mountain, and when it hits a boulder, it doesn't try and push it out of the way or get angry that it's in the way. It just flows around. So a lot of what we need to learn how to do, which is really hard for perfectionist people pleasers, is to learn how to flow with the obstacles that life throws at us. Easier said than done, but definitely doable.
I love that, actually. I feel like I can do that. I can flow, right?
Yeah.
Like, surely. Have you heard, so you talked about breathing. Have you heard of Calm Ego? Have you seen this? So
No,
it actually it looks like an asthma inhaler, but it's an exhaler. And so it vibrates, it has lavender scent. So I bought this, I found this because one of my daughters has anxiety. I have 12-year-old twins. And Melissa, I'm sure you can guess which one I'm talking about, but one of them has anxiety. And so, we've done a lot of different things, but we found this exhaler and it's called Calm Ego. And you just breathe into it and it helps you count your breaths and like calm yourself. And it has the scent and it vibrates when you've breathed out long enough. She has found it's very helpful to calm her mind, because she has a very hard time once she's spun up calming down. So check out Calm Ego. They are not paying for this.
But they should be.
They should be.
And, right? And it's things like that. So those kind of breathing techniques, basically they help put pressure onto the vagus nerve, which polyvagal theory is this newish way of looking at stress management and understanding how our big nerve in our body is connected to everything else. And really that vagus nerve is the calming nerve. It just big warm hug of a blanket throughout our entire body. And so when we have that pressure from breathing out against some resistance, that can put some pressure or can help calm that nerve. So that's a really good way to do it.
I love those vagal releasing maneuvers. I have to do one sometimes when I'm feeling really stressed. It's where like you kind of sit up straight and then like you go to the side, or no, you looking forward, but you move all your eyes all the way to one side and then you wait to yawn. And I don't know what it is, but it's something like your body just releases when you make that action. And I feel so much calmer when I do that.
Until I yawn?
Yeah, it's actually, it's an exercise I learned in therapy. So nobody who's just listening to this will see what's going on, but you stay and you just sit forward, right? Just like this, stand up straight. And then you'll move your eyes right to the right, all the way to the right without moving anything else. And eventually your body relaxes enough. And again, I don't understand the science behind it, but I can see all yawn now. And
oh my God,
there you go.
It makes my body so relaxed, because I would tense up. Like my anxiety ends up becoming this psychosomatic response of tension and hyperventilation and freaking out. And I think another thing too, going into the analogy that you were talking about, Avery, is like kind of letting things just flow, right? Is one of the things that I had to learn about my anxiety when I was really, really burnt out was that it's happened, right? So you can't prevent it now. It's already here and you can't fight it, right? You have to recognize it and work with it. And for somebody, I think like myself, who just suffers from anxiety, you learn to live with it, I guess, which sounds terrible, but I think the practices that you're talking about actually make it manageable somewhat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where like a lot of people talk about anxiety relieving practices. But really, when we look at how can I invite this anxiety in, how can I hear what it's trying to tell me? And that's, again, where that internal family systems model can help you, personify your anxiety and start to see yourself as separate from it. So that way you can recognize that this part of you is getting activated and be able to like, okay, well, come here. Like, let's hold space for this. Let's figure out where are we feeling all of this and why. And it just allows you to then ride that wave, because really suffering and that struggle comes when we're resisting the emotion that's there. And when we can actually just allow that wave, for sure, it's going to get a little bit worse, but you're going to actually see that the wave goes away much faster than you thought it would.
So you just said Avery, blah, blah, blah. And that made me remember that I am just like, okay, you went through a name change. Please talk to me about this. You're not the first person I've met actually that has changed their first name, but I'd love to hear your thought process and actually like pulling the trigger on doing that. That's bold.
Yeah. Oh, it was scary, Laura. I'm going to tell you that right now. It scared the crap out of me. Yeah. So it was about 2 years after my initial diagnosis. So when I hinted before about my epic burnout in 2018, I was running my business and then also working full-time 12-hour shift work at a very busy, very sick ICU with very complex patients. And it was December 25th. I was coming off the night shift and the charge nurse looked me in the eye and she was just like, oh, you do not look well. Like, go home, feel better. And so I slept for 20 hours and I slept for 20 hours the next day and the day after that. And so basically there was multiple like tests and surgeries and things. And then eventually I was left with this person that I didn't even recognize anymore. I didn't feel like a high achiever. And that's all I identified as. I couldn't do my job. And I had my identity so wrapped up in being an ICU nurse. And the life that I saw for me and my partner was completely different. We had been married for 3 months when I got sick. So in sickness and in health hit a lot faster than we thought it would. And so it's just all of these things kind of piled on. And so eventually I was just sitting on the floor talking to my partner and I was like, I think I have to let Heather go. So I had spent 37 years of my life as Heather, and I realized that if I wanted to move forward, there was no middle ground. Everything changed too quickly and too severely that I couldn't find the compromise. So I had to let Heather go. And so I spent a couple of days on baby name blogs, looking at all the different kinds of names and their meanings, and the only name that stood out was Avery. And the first time someone called me Avery, it's like something settled into my body and I felt at home again, something which I hadn't felt for far beyond when I first got sick. So it was such a scary thing to tell my family. I was there at Thanksgiving dinner and I'm like shaking like a leaf, being like, oh my this is gonna be fine. And yeah, I told them, and it was just so beautiful how my family embraced it, how the people in my life embraced it. A lot of people said, like, I didn't see you as a Heather anyway. You only looked like an Avery to me. And I'm like, great. And so then I put it out to my email newsletter segment, and I had hundreds of replies of people that had either done it themselves or knew someone that's changed their name.
Wow.
So I think it's actually a lot more common than we think. And shortly after I decided to change my name, I saw another video, and it talked about what would it be like if we were given a name until we were sort of in our midlife and we've really discovered who we are, and then we have a chosen name. And I just think that's such a beautiful way to live. And my partner's grandmother had always wanted to be called by her middle name, but never had the courage to do it until the last 10-ish years of her life. And she just came alive when she could be called the name that she felt at home in. So yeah, it's definitely uncommon, but it's not as uncommon as you think. But I had so much fear because my entire business was branded around Heather Thatcher, the social media, the websites, the talks and everything. But within days of me announcing that this is what I was doing online, I had done a number of video testimonials for people. And every single one of them had changed my name in the testimonial video. So that way it would match Avery Thatcher. And I just found that so touching in a world that feels so disconnected sometimes, just that little bit of compassion was just so beautiful.
It's amazing that there is so much power in a first name.
Yes.
Just like your whole, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but your whole identity was really wrapped up in, or not wrapped up in, you weren't someone named Heather. So do you feel like, was this a personality change, or you've just always been Avery? Like, I don't even know how to ask that question.
Yeah, I think I know where you're getting at. Yeah. And so I think a part of me was Heather for a very long time. And I think a lot of it was just how much life changed. Because I know that we all go through changes and things adapt and we adapt. And it was just that my life took a 180. And the version of me and the life I saw myself living and the person that I was becoming was no longer possible. And so that's where it was just like, that entire vision was dark because there was no chance of that. So then I had to figure out a new way.
Okay.
And for me, that was a name.
That's really interesting because we've talked a lot about with burnout and managing it, right? But I think that, I mean, when you advocate and say it's okay to just, maybe there are some things that are burning you out or maybe making you feel not authentic, that it's okay to just put those in the past and move on, which I think is like, sometimes you feel like, oh, well, I'm quitting. Like I have to head down and power through and get through this burnout. But is it okay to just say, you know what, this isn't serving me anymore. So I'm not going to do this anymore and I'm going to move on.
Yeah, definitely. And that's when we can look at some of the holes in our boat, right? And some of them we can do something about, we can plug, we can stop those up and remove those aspects from our life, create separation from that. But then there's other things that we can't, and we just need to learn how to manage and live with them. And that's where, again, letting go of that resistance, just leaning into it, riding that wave, moving, flowing with that boulder, that can really change a lot and prevent a lot of energy drain, which is really what burnout's all about.
Sometimes you just got to get out of that boat and swim to another one, find a different one.
Yeah, that's a very freeing thought. That you could just say like, I'm done with that. And now I'm this unapologetically, like, this is what's happening now. Get on board, get in the boat. Like, this is what we're doing. Yeah. I love that idea. I'm very much thinking, how am I going to apply this to my life?
Ooh, beautiful. I'm excited to hear.
And I really feel like, and Melissa, this is probably a wrap-up question, but do you have anything else before I?
No, go ahead. Okay.
I was just going to ask, like, and not even ask, you sound like you really are designing a life, like thoughtfully and on purpose, designing a life you love and making tough decisions so you can have that. Do you feel like that's true for you? Like, are you goal setting and you're planning and you're designing this life?
1,000%. And I'm doing that while listening to my body and what I'm capable of. So prior to getting sick, I was teaching yoga, like the normal classes, studio, whatever. And then now I teach 15-minute yoga classes because that works for my body. So my business is built around what works for me, what I can sustain. And I say no to everything that does not work with that. And so I used to be a terrible boundary setter. I feel like I've got the queen crown for that right now. Like, it's just so much easier because I, again, have really made peace with that part of me that contributes to the disability and the energy drain. And so now, instead of me fighting it and being like, oh, why can't you be better? I'm just like, okay, we're going to take care of you. I'm going to figure out how to take care of you. And it's just so much easier to design your life around when you feel that connection to yourself rather than the resistance of what you don't want.
This has been really insightful. Thank you so much for sharing all of this yourself with us and our listeners. And where can people find you if they want to learn more and maybe they want to do some 15-minute yoga, or they would like to check out your app? Because you do have an app, I saw.
I do have an app, yes. It's called Creating Calm, because let's be real, we all need a little bit more calm in our life. And so it's about working with those pockets of time. So you can find me at becomingavery.com. Both of my podcasts are linked there as well. And there's a ton of free resources, including a quiz to help you discover your self-sabotage style.
Oh my God, I'm going to take that quiz. I don't know if I want to know.
Of course, I give you strategies for how to manage it once you know. I
Okay,
don't just leave you out in the ocean by yourself and be like,
this is how you're
"Hey, the odds be in your
sabotaging.
favor."
Bye.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This has been great. And there's a lot of great takeaways here. I'm excited to listen to it again and like start journaling.
Beautiful. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to check out our next podcast, coming live next week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. In the meantime, you can find us and more wonderful stories like these on designdash.com. And make sure to follow us at Design Dasher on Instagram and TikTok. Till next time.